We next move on to evaluation of visual loss of unknown etiology by Dr. Subhadra. She heads the Center for Vitreoretina in the L.V. Prasad Eye Institute. Her main interest is in pediatric ophthalmology. She has, apart from her MD, she has had fellowships in vitreoretina in Bethesda, Maryland, and Michigan, USA, and has to her credit more than 250 presentations. Dr. Subhadra.
Thank you, sir. I'm really honored to be with all the young people here. So, the previous talk showed such beautiful things, but what happens when a patient comes with nothing? You just look into the eye and everything looks normal and patient is very unhappy and says he wants some drops or he wants some treatment and he can't see, or he has some floaters, or there's a scotoma, or he's not happy with his vision. And you examine and there's nothing. So, then the best thing is send to your colleague because they can find out. But let us see what are the important, clinical tools, very basic, simple clinical tools that can tell you what is the cause of vision loss. So everybody should know how vision is generated in human beings, like what we see. So most of us, we tend to look at vision as visual acuity. So that's the first myth to go. What we record is visual acuity, which is the 100% contrast, discrimination ability of the patient. But what the patient actually sees is not visual acuity. What the patient experiences as vision is a whole lot of three-dimensional experience of the visual surround. So there's contrast involved, there's edges involved, there's color involved, there's clarity involved, there should be no distortion. So there's a whole experience, there's a visual field involved, there's a whole visual experience which the patient is trying to communicate to you. So that is what you should look at whenever a patient comes to you with unexplained vision, symptoms. So one of the very important thing is, whenever a patient, let's say after cataract surgery, doesn't improve or, is having 6/12 or 20/40 vision, then the first thing they will write is, there's a dull foveal reflex, so send to retina. So I think this is something which we should all know, that a dull foveal reflex does not cause vision loss. A dull foveal reflex is natural, normal in certain age groups or in certain colored fundus. So I think best way to know what type of dull foveal reflex or what type of macula or foveal changes affect vision is to do this exercise for each one of yourselves. Look at a retina, look at the fovea, think what is the vision of this patient and write down your vision. What do you think this macula should be? Is this a 6/6 macula like what you see below? Or what do you think the vision in the top photograph would be? So anybody who sees this will immediately think maybe this patient has 660 vision or maybe 636 vision. But actually both these pictures are of patients having 20/20 vision. Because the upper one is Best's disease, where there's no change in vision and they have this large lesion which looks very horrifying, but vision is not affected. And the low one looks like a pristine retina, and this has a 20/20 vision. So just by looking at the retina, you cannot always tell what is the lesion and what effect it would have on the vision. If the top photograph patient had 20/20 vision, then Best's come as the first diagnosis, because that's a condition where you can have very large lesions without affecting vision. But if that vision was, 660 or 636, then you will think of diagnosis like choroiditis or CNVM or other things. So I think if you do this regularly for your patients and try to think what is the vision of this patient based on what the macula is looking like, you will be surprised to see that many patients where you thought that macula is looking abnormal actually have good vision, but you never thought of that when you referred the patient with 6/12 vision, because you start thinking of macular abnormality only when you have low vision and don't start looking at macula when they have good vision. So this is a good exercise to know what a normal macula should look like at different age groups and different colors. So whenever you have a patient who has visual symptoms, it's always best to go stepwise. You should not jump the queue. If you jump, then you will miss the diagnosis. So the comprehensive basic eye examination, a complete eye examination has to be done. The proper visual acuity, what is the distant vision, what's the near vision, what's the best corrected vision, refraction, and then a cycloplegic flash should be done after dilatation and cycloplegia. And then keratometry, again, sometimes you can very obviously see on slit lamp there are tight sutures or there's a scar, and the optometrist comes up, or somebody's done a refraction, comes up with a spherical refraction or -1 cylinder. This is untrue. It cannot happen. You can look at that cornea and say, this has to have irregular astigmatism. This is not -1 cylinder, this may be having -7 cylinder. So you need to pursue that, because they're refracting only from a wrong area. So you may want to do a keratometry or an OB-scan to really look at that ocular surface, which doesn't look to be having such a small cylinder. Then of course you will always look at the intraocular pressure, which is part of your normal evaluation. And then proptosis, again, this can be missed if you are very used to just looking at the slit lamp and not looking at the facial profile of the patient if there is any proptosis. Ocular motility and alignment, again, a very good cover test must be done in all patients, and look at the ocular motility. And then slit lamp biomicroscopy, and again in this fluorescein stain is very important. We've had patients undergo MRI, CT scan, everything, whereas the patient actually had an SPK, a superficial punctate keratopathy, because of excessive use of medication. And because the cornea was not stained or a distant direct ophthalmoscopy was not done, this diagnosis was missed. And that was actually what was causing the blurred vision in the patient. So fluorescein staining and proper evaluation of the corneal surface would go a long way in preventing you from, fishing around. Then a dilated lens evaluation. Again, it's not always very easy to pick up nuclear cataracts, especially in high myope patients, if you are, always doing indirect ophthalmoscopy or not doing just a direct ophthalmoscopy. So a distant direct or a retroillumination evaluation of the lens is required, and always compare the two eyes. And again, this is a good exercise. Whenever you see a cataract patient, always try to guess. Before looking at the vision, look at the cataract and say, okay, this is a 618 cataract, or this is a 612 cataract, or this is a 66 cataract. So then you start learning what is the type of vision, a particular type of lens opacity, because these are all visual phenomena. You are only looking at the color of the lens. There is no objective measure. And you have to make an intelligent practice, practice your eyes to see what type of lens opacity causes what type of color change and what type of vision. So all your cataract patients, you must practice your indirect, your direct, and your slit lamp view, what type of cataract and what type of vision. Then slowly you start understanding whether the cataract explains the vision or it doesn't the vision. So once you've done this basic examination and you've not found anything very specific, but patient is symptomatic, then you need to reassess the history. Go back to the history and the symptoms. These are very vital clues. Just spend some time with the patient. What was the onset of vision loss? Was it slow or was it sudden? Here we have a patient with diabetic maculopathy who has come with sudden loss of vision for last 3 days. Now this is not compatible. Diabetic macular edema never ever causes sudden loss of vision. If you see this patient and vision is 660 or 636 and you start thinking this is a diabetic macular edema, you will treat it. But you've not found the cause, which was actually a CNS infarct and causing a homonymous chordrantinopia, which you would have definitely missed if you didn't think that diabetic macular edema never presents with sudden loss of vision. Actually, most of the patients will not even complain of loss of vision, or they'll complain of mild blurring for many, many months or years. They will never come with sudden loss of vision. So, you need to know what's the natural, symptom of a particular thing, and just because something is visible, don't attribute to it. So, you need to know whether it was slow, sudden, chronic, gradual, and then also find out what's the exact problem the patient is having. As I told you, you have to look at the visual experience of the patient. You need to ask, do you have difficulty in reading? Do you have difficulty in going out in the sun? Do you have difficulty in driving? So task-specific questions if you ask, then you can come to know where is the problem. Because different lesions cause different types of visual disturbance. Especially ask about scotomas, ask about distortions. Does this line look wavy? Do you see a shadow? Are you having double vision? Is there another shadow next to the thing? Is it with the glasses or without the glasses? Does it always cause a problem when you're wearing glasses? Maybe his optical centration of the glasses is not correct. Or maybe there's some problem in his glasses and, he'll say my vision is worse with the glasses. So you need to look at that. Then the effect of illumination. Are you better in dim light? Are you better in bright light? So, nuclear cataracts will have a different effect of illumination as compared to posterior subcapsular cataracts. And similarly, some of the retinal diseases cause more problem in bright light, whereas others cause more problem in dim illumination. So, effect of illumination on their visual status. And whatever symptoms they have, is it progressive? Is it static? When was the last you had good vision? So, these questions, like, basic question of when did you enjoy good vision last? When did you have the last checkup of your vision? What was the vision at that time? So you will know whether it was progressive. Do you have any old papers? I think most of the times my discussion with the fellows is they don't look at the old papers. They think they know everything. So patient has come to LV Prasad, so we can know everything. Always think that there's somebody intelligent out there who has examined the patient before, has noted down some findings. Always look at the old papers. Even there may be small slips of paper in the patient's pocket. Get them out and see what was his vision last time, what was the vision when he first presented to the doctor, what was the signs. Something is written there. Always take that into account. Dr. Santosh already told, if patient has been on steroids, it changes the whole picture of the disease. So find out what type of medication patient had or what type of treatment they had. And was it in one eye together with the other eye, or one eye was before, which eye was earlier. So try to get that information. And then any associated or antecedent events. So this patient of diabetic macular edema comes with sudden vision loss. Always ask, did you have headache? Did you have vertigo? Then you can know it was a subdural hemorrhage, or it was a intracranial bleed, or it was a CNS lesion, and not the diabetic macular edema, which will cause a sudden loss of vision. So any fever, any flu, so all those antecedent events you need to ask. So once you've got this history, you have some idea what type of problem the patient has, and then basic evaluation of the color vision, the visual phenomenon, as I said. So these include color vision. So not only Ishiaras, but if you have access to a good color vision test like the D15, that is a good test. Amsler grade, this is a very good test which I think many people don't use. It will pick up all these scotomas and metamorphopsia. Confrontation fields, again every resident fellow must learn how to do a good confrontation field, how to do a field examination confrontation in uncooperative patient, in elderly patient, in one-eyed patients. So how to pick up homonymous lesions, how to pick up central scotomas, how to pick up, quadrant anopias. That's a whole lecture in itself, how to do these field examinations. Somebody where you can do quickly in the clinic and come up with a good, evaluation that this patient has a field problem, and whether you need to go and do a formal field, or you think patient will not cooperate, but you've got your clue that there is a field loss. Then, of course, as I said, you will go back to your cycloplegic refraction. Sometimes the optometrist will write, dull glow on retinoscopy. So if you say lens is clear, media is clear, then there should be no dull glow on retinoscopy. That means there is a problem in the cornea, or the patient has like minus 20 refractive error or plus 20 refractive error, and they didn't, check that. They just checked up to minus 4, 5, and they didn't realize that this has a very high refractive error. But because of your retinal examination, you know that this patient looks like a high myope, or it looks like a, hyperopic fundus. So you must repeat the cycloplegic refraction and make sure that, all the findings are concurrent with each other. Then distant direct ophthalmoscopy, again this is a very good test which we many times bypass. It will pick up all the media opacities. It will pick up your keratoconus or your irregular astigmatism. It will pick up your SPK, your cataract. So a distant direct ophthalmoscopy to look for the red glow, that's a good test. If there is availability, you can do a potential acuimeter test. But again, this potential acuimeter test has a lot of false positives, false negatives. I'm not going to go all details, but important to know that it cannot be done in patients who have less than counter finger 2 meters vision. It cannot be done in patients who are illiterate. It's very difficult to do, and you need patients' cooperation. And you have to always compare between the two eyes. So don't send for potential acuimeter test, which many people do for one eye. Always you have to do the other eye, because that is your control eye. So color vision, if we do, it is normal in amblyopia and cataract. So if you have abnormal vision in color, then you should not label it as amblyopia. Amblyopes have normal color vision. Similarly in cataract, if cataract is the cause of loss of vision, then the color vision should be normal. So same thing in optic nerve dysfunction, it can be abnormal. In macular diseases also it can be affected. Of course, in many of the retinal degenerations it is affected. So it can tell you, give you an idea what is the visual function of this patient in terms of the color vision. Amsler grid I have told. Distortion and scotoma are very typical for macular diseases, and in some of the optic nerve and visual pathway CNS lesions, the patient may be able to draw the exact hemianopia or the altitudinal hemianopia. If there is a normal Amsler, it means that mostly there is not a very serious defect of the optic nerve and the macular area. So we had this 10-year-old boy who came to my hospital many years back. And, I talked to the father, and what the father was saying is that this patient is using glasses for many years. And every time we check the glasses, after every 6 months to 8 months, his vision goes down. So we looked at the old paper. So it said, 6.6 with -3. That was the first visit in Jaipur. And then it was 6.12 with -5. That was in Delhi. And then it was 6.18 with -8 by the time he came to Hyderabad. Somebody had seen him. And this is ongoing. So we should know that, if it's a simple myopia, patient may have increase in refraction, but his vision should not go down. And this was 10-year-old boy, and I just asked him, I said, which class are you studying? I just wanted to know whether he's communicative. I said, which class you are studying? And he said, I'm in 10th grade. So immediately I know that there's a very serious problem. This boy looks like a 10-year-old, but he's actually 16. And then we know, we do a confrontation and we pick up, bitemporal hemianopia. We know he has a craniopharyngioma, which is causing him, loss of secondary sex characters have not come. He looks like a very tiny boy. He's not grown. So when I asked the father, I said, was he always like this? He said, yeah, he's he looks smaller for his age, and he's always been like this. And the father didn't believe when I told, there's a pituitary tumor and you need to get a CT scan done or an MRI. He thought, this small girl telling me something. I've been to so many centers, and everybody told me your child has degenerative myopia. So we should know that, simple myopia or refractions, they can change, they can increase, but the vision should not go down. If the visual acuity is suffering, then we need to evaluate in more detail. So that comes to visual field test. This is one of my favorite tests. In all patients, we have unexplained vision loss, or even if they don't have any vision loss, but patient comes with some symptoms. If a patient comes to you and vision is 6/9 and patient says, my vision is not good, you must do a Fields and an Amsler, because that is part of the routine examination. Because a patient with 6/9 vision will not be symptomatic. They will not come to you that I have some problem, unless they have a scotoma or a metamorphopsia or a field loss. Usually 6/9 refractive change, they will be asymptomatic. So many people have 6/9 vision or 6/9 parts vision. So if you do a visual field test, for example, this patient came with a normal looking retina, 6/9 vision, but he says my vision is very bad. And when we did his field test, he was right, his vision was bad because he had so much of visual loss, and we actually diagnosed him to have a transient CRAO in the past with a serious underlying carotid artery disease. So sometimes things can look very simple, but a field test will really tell you. If your field test is totally normal, then you've ruled out major diseases, because it's very difficult to get a normal field, even in normal people. So if the field test is normal, then you're reassured that you've not missed anything very, very serious. But always you must do a field test before you tell the patient there's nothing wrong in your eye. So ocular ultrasonography most people do when the media is hazy, and that's fine, you will pick up any lesions. But sometimes even with clear media, it's good to do a ultrasound. For example, in this patient, there was some lens matter behind the iris, which was being missed on routine examination, and patient was being treated as uveitis. Or there may be a small shallow detachment or retinoschisis, which you're not able to pick up because you don't have that expertise, or you're not sure, a patient is not cooperative. So always do an ultrasound whenever you think there is something which you think that there is something. So we can do ultrasound to pick up subtle lesions of the retina. Now, a good non-invasive test, which you will be, of course, hearing in this conference in multiple sessions, is autofluorescence. And this is a non-invasive test. You just put the patient on the camera, and using infrared waves or short wavelength, you can pick up a lot of changes in the RP level. And some of the diseases I have listed here. So with great sensitivity and specificity, autofluorescence, it just takes few minutes, and it's non-invasive, can pick up these lesions, and you can know whether there's a macular lesion or not. Is the disease vision loss because of a maculopathy? If your autofluorescence is totally normal, then it's unlikely that there's a macular lesion causing the vision disturbance. So here we had a child who came to us, 6-year-old, with Best disease. His father is also Best disease, and he complained of vision loss, and we did an OCT. It showed a CNVM in the eye with the hemorrhage, but it also showed a CNVM in the asymptomatic eye. So OCT again is a good test to check for subtle structural changes in the macula. It will not pick up functional disorders. And this I already referred to, in addition to OCT, the OBSCAN or your keratometry, good keratometry, which will pick up many of the corneal causes of unexplained vision loss. So you should do invasive tests only once you've done your clinical examination, you've done your office examination, and you've done your non-invasive test. Then only you should start thinking of an invasive test. So one of the invasive tests we always do in many retina patients is fluorescein and ICG. Again, this is a requirement for this is much less if you do a good clinical examination and autofluorescence. Then you can, come down to that level that yes, this patient needs an angiogram. So some of the conditions which may be subtle clinically, like CNVM in myopes, or this IPCV lesion on ICG angiography, or macular ischemia, or choroidal ischemia. So these things can be picked up very well by angiography and can explain some of the visual loss. But see, there's no substitute for a basic examination. All the machines are there, all the tests are there, but if you are not vigilant, if you don't follow the correct way of examining the patient clinically, you will just be fishing around, and you will order hundreds of tests, and then you will have no idea how to interpret this. So this is a 60-year-old female, came from a town just 100 miles from Hyderabad. She has history of headache and vomiting, and the ophthalmologist has seen her, and he has noticed, optic disc pallor in one eye and suspected disc edema in the other eye, and he's done his MRI, and the MRI is normal. So they have sent to my husband, who's a neurologist, and my husband sees the patient and refers it to me saying the disc looks like glaucomatous cupping. And when we, checked the pressure, it was 60 pressure. She had acute angle closure glaucoma. I was very angry. I mean, I don't want my husband to come and tell me this is a glaucomatous optic atrophy when the ophthalmologist had already seen, but he had never checked the IOP. Because of headache, vomiting, they have gone ahead and done an MRI. So, because they have bypassed that IOP checkup. So I think it's very important to do your comprehensive, complete examination first before you start sending the patient for any tests. So some of the diseases which are very subtle, which can be difficult to diagnose, one of them I have shown here. This patient of diabetic retinopathy sent to us, but you can see that this patient has a lot of new vessels, but there is no non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. There are no microenzymes, there are no hemorrhages on FFA. So you know that PDR always occurs on a background of NPDR. So if you find somebody having new vessels, somebody having subtle iris neovascularization, or an elderly female having few KPs, then you must think of ocular ischemic syndrome, which occurs because of carotid artery disease. It can be very well diagnosed by ERG and also by your carotid Doppler scan. That brings us to the electrophysiology test. So there are a lot of electrophysiology tests. Each of them checks different parts of the visual pathways. Again, I'm not going to go into all details here because we are having some instruction course on ERG. You can attend that to get more details. But basically, again, we should not just order ERG, EOG, VP, which everybody does. You should try to know exactly what each test does, what part of visual pathway it checks, what can be the possible interpretations, what is the pretest probability of this test coming positive, and then have a tailor-made testing protocol. So we'll just show here two patients coming with 6/9, 6/12 vision. Fundus looks grossly normal, and patient says that he's got visual disturbance. So in one of these patients, this is a normal ERG. We see that there is no B wave here. There's only a negative ERG. So this patient has congenital stationary night blindness, whereas another patient like this, he has no flicker, so he has a cone dystrophy. So sometimes these diseases, the retina can look normal, but you could have guessed what this patient had if you had asked, is the problem more in night or day? So if the patient says more in night, then you already know, yes, if I do an ERG, most likely I will get CSNB. If I do an ERG, this patient has bright light problem, so I will get a cone dystrophy. So if you ask, then you know what you are likely to get, and so you can correlate and you can, not make errors, because sometimes some of these tests, like suppose the electrode falls off or it's not connected well, it will give an abnormal report, and then you will think patient has retinitis pigmentosa, or patient has absent ERG or absent VP, whereas actually patient is normal. So whenever you do a test, you must have a pretest probability of what this patient is likely to get, what type of result I am expecting. And if the result is very different, then you must go back and check, is the result appropriately done? Is it matching my clinical diagnosis, my differential diagnosis? Your treatment should not be based just on test reports. You should not treat the test reports. You must treat the patient as a whole. So here we have a patient referred to me as choroiditis or unilateral RP. So when we did the ERG, it is showing a very good photoreceptor function. That is, the A wave is present. So we know that this is not RP, this is not choroiditis. When we ask the history, then she gives history of vision loss during pregnancy. So we know this is a resolved pregnancy-induced hypertension with CRO. So we can, make intelligent information guess and avoid unnecessary investigations if we know exactly what test tells us what. Another example, this patient of retinitis pigmentosa has come to us with loss of vision of 2200, has typical features like arterial narrowing, disc pallor, pigmentation. But when we did the multifocal ERG, it was absolutely normal. And clinically also macula looks normal. So this macula is a 20/20 macula. It should not cause a 2200 vision. And the diagnosis comes when we compare it to the other eye. So this patient has RP, but macula is normal. Macula function is normal on multifocal and actually has got optic neuritis in that eye. So it's an optic neuritis in a patient with RP. There's nothing which stops optic neuritis occurring in an RP patient. Okay, so comparison with the other eye, understanding what can cause vision loss and what can't is important to know exact cause of loss of vision. So whenever you have a patient of unexplained vision loss or visual symptoms, what we covered was always do a comprehensive basic eye examination first, reassess the history and the symptoms, talk to the patient, do the simple office examinations, make a working hypothesis, then go to the non-invasive ocular investigations. If they don't solve your problem, go to the invasive ones, and then you can do the non-ocular investigations like MRI and all. So because of this process, this pattern of evaluation, you will pick up all these diseases which may look very subtle or which may not have very obvious signs in the eye, like corneal pathologies, glaucoma, toxic optic neuropathy, ischemic optic neuropathy, resolved optic neuritis, and CSR. These are very difficult to differentiate sometimes, CSR and resolved optic neuritis, retrobulbar neuritis, then all the macular lesions, some of the retinal dystrophies, ocular ischemia. They can also pick up things like intracranial tumors, infarcts. They will help you to know whether it's really an amblyopia or there's something else going on. Even the amblyopic eye can have other diseases developing, so it will help you to pick up. It will pick up dry eye syndrome. It will also pick up cataract, which you thought is not the cause of vision loss in a high myope. But these do not pick up some of the most subtle diseases or rare diseases like occult macular dystrophy, for which you need to do a focal macular ERG or a multifocal ERG specifically. This is a rare condition. Then microtropia. So microtropia, you need to do a 4-prism based test. So many times we miss this microtropia in our initial evaluation. We do all the tests, everything, and we are not able to make out why this field change is there or why the patient has vision loss, because the history is not there. And then when you finished everything, then you say, oh my God, let me do this 4-prism test, and then you say, okay, it's a microtropia. So we should keep in mind microtropia can present with vision loss of unknown origin. And of course, there may be many more conditions which I still have to learn about. As the experience will go, we'll come back with some more conditions. Thank you. So I'm happy to take any questions if you have on any of these tests, methodologies. Any questions? Only last week I had one patient, I told my fellow, go and see that patient. So he saw, and he said, Madam, I checked out, she had minus 0.5 cylinder, and I have given the glass. And I said, no, call that patient back. She's a pituitary tumor. I wanted you to see that patient. So patient had typical history, she had 2 abortions. She had pregnancy, and after pregnancy, she told me, because I asked her, because when I talked to her, she said she's having vision loss. But vision was 6.6 with minus 0.5 cylinder. So minus 0.5 cylinder, vision 6.6, patient will never come to you. You may pick it up on screening. Okay? So it's very important to talk to the patient. So I asked her menstrual history, I asked her, her pregnancy history. She had 2 abortions before, and in her last pregnancy, she said after feeding for 2 months, her milk stopped, and she could not feed the baby. So when I did a confrontation, she had an inferior altitudinal chondrotenopia. So, but the fellow didn't diagnose the subtle disc pallor and didn't ask the history. She also had history of headache for last few months. So there can be very subtle changes, and so I think it's very good to do a field test in any patient who comes to you with some symptoms if you're not sure. If we should not just think that this patient is malingering. Once you do a field, then you're comfortable. Then you can say, okay, review SOS or something. But I think that's one thing I have learned. Always do a field test whenever you have symptoms of vision loss and you can't explain the symptoms. Any questions, queries? I don't know how we are doing with time.
Yeah, we've got enough time.
Yes. So fundus autofluorescence helps us to know about the retinal pigment.
Yeah, can somebody pass on a mic, please?
Yeah, he has a mic. Fundus autofluorescence, the normal one which we do with 480 nanometer wavelength, it will pick up your, lipofuscin in the retinal pigment epithelium. So if there is any abnormality of that, whether it's hypo or hyper, then it will pick up that this is a retinal disease. It's not an optic nerve disease or it's not a, CNS disease. Of course, both can, coexist. Okay, but generally we want to think that all these signs, symptoms are because of one disease. Rarely patient can have 2 diseases. So if your autofluorescence is totally normal, then you know that this vision loss is not because of a retinal problem. It's possibly because of optic nerve or refraction or some other problem.
So it's completely non-invasive?
Yes, it's non-invasive. The patient just sits. I think if you are here, you can see on the Heidelberg or Zeiss machine, they do autofluorescence. You can get yourself also done. So it's very simple. You just sit there and it just scans the retinal pigment epithelial layer. It's totally non-invasive. It will pick up your CME, your macular holes, your ERM, your retinal dystrophies, choroiditis, so many things. It will pick up Stargardt's, early Stargardt's.
Ma'am, and a potential acuity meter test, do we do it or is it?
Say that again.
Potential visual acuity meter.
Yeah, so potential visual acuity, there are different instruments to check it. Basically, basic principle is that it projects a Snellen's chart behind the opacities. So if there's a cataract or cornea, it will project that Snellen's chart into the vitreous cavity so the patient can read. Okay, so patient has to sit on the slit lamp and there's a potential actimeter which may be laser based or light based, different machines are there, and you ask the patient to read the chart. The chart is in front of you and you see whether the patient can read most of the lines. So usually it underestimates the vision. So if patient can read 6:18, then it's likely that after cataract surgery or corneal transplant, the patient will get 6:12 or something. But it requires cooperation of the patient. Unfortunately, it's available only in English. It has a row of, 1, 2, 3, 4 numerals, but only one row. So if the patient is literate in any other language, you can ask them to hold a pen and write. Whatever they are seeing, they can draw that symbol. But if they're totally illiterate, then they have difficulty in doing this test. And also I said, you should do in the normal eye first. Then you know whether the patient is understanding the test. And then you can do in the abnormal.
So that's for opaque media.
Yes, it's for partially opaque media. If it is totally opaque, then you can't do it. So as I said, patients should have at least a vision of counter finger 1 to 2 meters before you do that test. If it is PLPR vision, you can't do that test. Or if it's a totally, total cataract advance. So it's for where you say, okay, maybe this cataract doesn't explain the vision loss, or maybe this cornea doesn't explain the vision loss, or this PCO doesn't explain the vision loss. Maybe there's a CME behind, I'm not able to assess. That is the patient where you do a potential actimeter testing.
Do we have that here?
We'll have to check whether it's in the trade. Maybe it is there. Maybe they have a prototype, or maybe it is available. You can check. Yes, please.
Can you let me know what are the office tests for malingering that we can do?
Okay, so for malingering, you must always do the RAPD. See, you should not label somebody malingering without doing the basic examination. So one of the tests you must always do is RAPD, because patient cannot malinger RAPD. So if you are not sure somebody has dilated, you should call back the patient. That RAPD must be checked. That is one thing we must always do. Okay, the second, as I told you, was color vision. So sometimes patients don't understand, they think they can do the color vision where they won't read the Snellens. And of course, what is written in the books, you can put a +10 or +5 on one side and rapidly change the eyes and rapidly change your occluder so that patient is confused which eye he is seeing, and keep on telling the patient, keep both eyes open, then you can make out. But they are sometimes very stubborn patients. They really want that compensation, they really want that blind certificate, and you may poke a knife into their eye, they won't blink. Okay, so then of course you need to think, then you need to do a VP. But again in VP, if the patient closes his eyes or he voluntarily defocuses, you will not get a VP. In that case, we do something called as an onset-offset VP, where you put a checkerboard and then you put a blank, then you put a checkerboard, then you put a blank. Patients cannot defocus that type of input. But sometimes, you have to do many times, or you have to talk to the patient and find out what is the underlying thing. We do get a lot of children who come to us. Recently we had a child who came, I can't see anything. So the first doctor has recorded 660 vision. When we checked here, he came with 612. Then after 2 hours we checked, he came with, 618. So we know that there's inconsistency. One, then when we talked to the patient in great detail, he told us that 2 of his friends in class 2, they've got glasses and he also wants glasses. So that's why he's malingering. So you need to talk to the patient. But yes, sometimes it's not all that easy.